Today, we're diving deep into the story of Kanpatimar Shankariya, a name that might not be as well known as some, but who was, without a doubt, one of India's most terrifying and prolific serial killers. This is a really dark chapter of criminal history, a story about a phantom who haunted the night and the desperate hunt to bring him into the light.
So let's set the scene. We're going back to the early 1970s in India. You have to remember, this was a relatively young nation, still dealing with the aftershocks of partition and facing some massive internal struggles. And it was in this climate of uncertainty that a brand new and very deadly kind of shadow began to creep across the country.
And this is where it gets absolutely chilling. That shadow would eventually claim the lives of over 70 people. Just let that number sink in for a second. 70 plus. That staggering number puts him right up there with the deadliest serial killers in the nation's history. His reign of terror cast this huge cloud of fear over multiple states for years.
So how did one man manage to unleash such a massive wave of terror? Well, let's start by looking at the fear itself, the absolute panic that paralyzed entire communities as this mysterious killer began his brutal work.
The case really exploded onto the national stage on September 9, 1973. A man arrived for his morning duties at a local Gurudwara, that's a Sikh place of worship, and he walked into an absolute horror scene. 3 of the caretakers had been attacked in their sleep. 2 were already dead, a third was barely hanging on, all of them lying in pools of their own blood.
The police, they pretty quickly identified a bone-chilling signature. You see, all the victims had been struck with incredible force, right below the ears. This brutal, very specific method of killing is what gave this phantom attacker his infamous nickname, Kanpatimar, which literally translates to the one who strikes beneath the ears. And you have to understand, the scale of the panic was just immense. The attacks weren't in just one town. They were spread across 3 different states, and they all happened in the dead of night, when people are at their most vulnerable. With no name and no face to this killer, he was like a ghost in the darkness. The fear was so real that families literally stopped sleeping in their own beds, choosing to huddle together in a single room for safety. The streets would go completely silent as soon as the sun went down. But this ghost, well, he was all too human. To really get a handle on the man behind the monster, we have to go back, way back to the beginning. Let's explore his early life and the path that led him to such incredible darkness. So he was born Shankar Prajapati in 1952. At first, his parents had high hopes for him, but when he showed absolutely no interest or talent in school, their support just crumbled. They basically cut him off, told him he had to survive on his own. And this, of course, pushed him into a life of petty crime, just to eat, stealing from neighbors, even raiding donation boxes in temples. And this actually brings us to a really interesting idea in criminology called the labeling theory. The basic concept is, when society, or in this case, even your own family, labels you a criminal or a failure, you're way more likely to just accept that label and then escalate your criminal behavior. For Shankar, being branded a thief might have become a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, setting him on a path he couldn't turn back from. I mean, just look at this timeline. You can see how fast his descent was. After his family literally moved to get away from his bad reputation, Shankar didn't change. Nope, he escalated. Between 1971 and 1973, this petty thief transformed into a ruthless murderer. Okay, so now let's flip the script and look at the immense challenge the police were facing. We're talking about the 1970s here. They were basically hunting a phantom without any of the modern forensic tools we just take for granted today.
The attack on a holy place like the Gurudwara created huge public pressure. I mean, you can imagine. The case immediately became a top priority, with a superintendent of police named Shyam Pratap Singh heading up the investigation. They found fingerprints at the scene, but without modern databases, they were totally useless. A complete dead end.
So, with no forensic leads, the police had to fall back on good old-fashioned detective work. They painstakingly interviewed the few survivors who had managed to escape his attacks. And from their harrowing stories, police artists were able to create sketches. Amazingly, the descriptions were all pretty consistent. A final composite sketch was drawn up and sent everywhere, becoming this paper ghost that haunted the entire country.
For months, nothing. Hope was really starting to fade. And then they got a call, a tip. Someone reported seeing a man who was a dead ringer for the sketch at a railway station in Bathinda, Punjab. This was it. This was the break they had been so desperately waiting for.
Police descended on Bathinda.
And this brings us to the capture of the man himself, and the absolutely horrifying revelations that came pouring out of him once he was finally in custody.
Once he was caught, Shankar, who'd been using an alias, Ratanlal, he didn't just confess to the crimes they knew about. No. He completely stunned investigators by admitting to a staggering 72 murders. Way, way more than they had ever imagined.
And his mindset was on full display. There was zero remorse, just this chilling arrogance. When they took him back to his hometown and asked for details, he reportedly just laughed and said, "Free my hands and feet first, then I will tell you how I murdered whom." Can you imagine? Those words just sent a shudder through even the most seasoned officers. His confession was just filled with these awful details. He said he used whatever was handy as a weapon. He casually mentioned how disappointed he was that after murdering 2 men at the Gurudwara, he only found 19 rupees to steal. And then there was this bizarre ritual. He claimed that after every single murder, he would travel to the holy Ganges River to bathe, because he believed it would wash away his sins.
So, the big question remains, what on earth drove him to do these things? This final section gets into his real motive and the incredibly swift justice that followed his confession. Now, you might think robbery was the reason, but the truth was so much more sinister. Shankar confessed that he was actually addicted to the act of killing itself. It was never really about the money. It was all about the sadistic pleasure he got from his victims' suffering. And here it is, maybe the most chilling part of his entire confession. He told investigators that the sound of his victims screaming in agony was like a song to him. For him, it was entertainment. This wasn't about need or greed. This was just pure, unadulterated psychopathy. What's also pretty remarkable about this case is just how fast the justice system moved back then. After he confessed, he was sentenced to death in June of 1975. His appeals were quickly shot down, and by May 16, 1976, less than a year after his sentencing, he was executed. His final words, right before he was hanged, were this hollow warning: "I have killed many people without reason. Now don't become like me." Just a final, empty statement from a man who left behind nothing but a legacy of terror. And so the story of Kanpatimar Shankariya comes to an end. His trial is still remembered as one of the fastest ever for a serial killer in India's history. But it leaves us with this lingering question, right? In today's much more complex legal world, could justice for such a monster ever be delivered so swiftly? It's a pretty sobering thought to end on.